Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're diving deep into one of the most, well, enigmatic and foundational figures in Western thought, Thales of Miletus.
Right.
He's traditionally called the first philosopher, but as you'll see, that title comes with a lot of fascinating questions. You've given us some truly rich material here.
It's quite a story.
And our mission today is really to sift through the historical echoes, the scholarly debates, to understand not just what Thales might have believed, but why he still matters so profoundly today.
And what's really fascinating, I think, is that to even begin understanding Thales, we first have to grapple with what scholars call the Thales problem.
The Thales problem.
Yeah, it's the simple fact that, well, he didn't leave any writings behind himself. None at all.
So everything we think we know.
It's all pieced together from fragments, anecdotes, often written centuries after he actually lived. It's like assembling a puzzle with most of the pieces missing.
Wow, okay.
But this deep dive, it reveals that maybe his most revolutionary contribution wasn't a specific correct answer, but a profound shift in how we ask questions.
How so?
Moving from mythos, that's mythological explanation, to logos, which is rational inquiry, he basically proposed a universe governed by natural principles, not just divine caprice.
Not just the whims of the god.
Exactly. But a key question we'll definitely explore is, how complete was that break from the world of myth? Was it really a clean split?
Right. So given that foundational shift, how does someone like Thales even emerge? I mean, his arrival wasn't just out of the blue, was it?
No, far from accidental. To get it, we really need to set the scene. We're talking 6th century BCE Ionia.
Specifically Miletus.
Exactly, the vibrant city of Miletus. And it truly was a crucible for new ways of thinking.
What made it so special?
Well, geographically, Miletus is on the western coast of Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. It was this dynamic border zone, a real cultural interface between the Greek world and the ancient Near Eastern civilizations.
A melting pot.
Absolutely. You had constant interaction. Hellenes, Lydians, Catarians, Persians, everyone mixing. This created a society that was, uniquely open to diverse ideas.
And it wasn't just ideas flowing in, was it? There was serious wealth involved, too.
Oh, absolutely. Huge amounts of wealth, extensive maritime trade, tons of colonies. Miletus alone supposedly founded around 80.
80 colonies, wow.
Yeah, it became incredibly rich. One of the richest cities in the Greek world, they said. And this wealth created a leisured class, aristocrats, merchants.
People with time on their hands.
Time and resources. And that leisure is critical for abstract intellectual pursuits. It's a key precondition, really, for speculative philosophy to get off the ground.
That link between wealth and thinking is fascinating. And this environment, it sparked something called the Ionian awakening.
Precisely. It's exactly what it sounds like. Ionia became the intellectual life of Greece during this period. You see huge developments, natural philosophy, epic poetry, history writing.
All bubbling up there.
Right. And think about the impact of all that cultural mixing. Constant exposure to competing foreign cultures, their different creation myths, especially from places like Egypt and Babylonia.
It must have made people question their own stories.
Inevitably. It weakens the absolute authority of traditional Greek mythology. I mean, if your trading partners have completely different origin stories, the Greek version starts to look less like the only truth, right?
Or like one story among many.
Exactly. That creates this sort of, cognitive dissonance is the term scholars use, an intellectual vacuum, almost.
And philosophy steps in.
Philosophy, as a rational enterprise, arises partly to fill that explanatory gap. It happens in this uniquely cosmopolitan, affluent environment.
So Miletus wasn't just a trading hub, it was a marketplace of ideas. Prime ground for someone like Thales.
Precisely. Miletus was the epicenter. Thinkers like Thales were exposed to Egyptian geometry, Babylonian astronomy.
Which pushed them away from just myth.
It certainly encouraged a departure from purely traditional narratives. And, Thales wasn't just an abstract thinker. He was seen as a practical guy, too.
Okay.
There are stories about his political savvy. He apparently advised the Ionian cities to form a proper federation, unite against the growing threat from Lydia and Persia.
Did they take his advice?
Nope. They rejected it. And the eventual Persian conquest kind of underscores the dangerous, precarious world these first philosophers were living in.
It makes you realize how fragile this whole intellectual movement was. And his personal story, it's almost as fragmented as his actual thought, isn't it?
Completely. His dates, like circa 624 to 546 GCE, they're approximate. based on later
With
accounts.
that solar eclipse story.
Exactly. The 585 BCE eclipse Herodotus claimed he predicted. Even his ancestry is debated. Was he Phoenician, Greek? It just reflects Miletus's mixed character again.
But what's really revealing, you mentioned, are the anecdotes. Maybe not strictly true, but they show how later Greeks saw him.
You got it.
Yeah.
He's often presented as this practical sage, one of the legendary 7 sages of Greece, right?
Mm-hmm.
Celebrated for practical wisdom, political insight.
Not just airy-fairy philosophy.
Not at all. Stories like him diverting the Halys River for King Croesus or advising the Ionians, they reinforce this image of a wise, effective man of action.
Then there's that famous olive press story from Aristotle. That's a classic.
It is. The story goes, people were mocking him, saying philosophy was useless, couldn't make you any money.
Yeah, the classic critique.
So Thales, supposedly using his knowledge of weather patterns from astronomy, predicts a massive olive harvest.
Okay.
He quietly goes and secures options, basically a monopoly, on all the olive presses in the region.
Sneaky.
Then, when the bumper harvest hits and everyone desperately needs a press, he rents them out at a super high price, makes a fortune.
Just to prove a point.
Exactly, to show that a philosopher could easily get rich if they wanted to, but, their real concerns are elsewhere.
But then there's the other side of the coin. Plato's story.
Right, the complete opposite image. Plato tells this tale of Thales walking along, gazing up at the stars, completely engrossed,
Right.
and he falls straight into a well, only to be mocked by this witty servant girl, like, "You're so busy trying to understand the heavens, you can't even see what's at your feet."
Ouch. The absent-minded professor.
That's the archetype it establishes. And these two stories together, the olive presses and the well, they're brilliant because they show this fundamental tension in how the Greeks viewed philosophy.
Practical genius versus impractical dreamer.
Precisely. The well story highlights the useless, impractical side. The olive press story, which Aristotle preserves, is a direct defense. It argues that understanding universal principles, the logos, actually gives you a kind of mastery over the practical world that pure experience doesn't.
So it vindicates philosophy.
It tries to, yeah, from that charge of uselessness.
Okay, so let's talk about these universal principles he was after. His big legacy, you said, is this bold attempt to find a rational, unified explanation for everything.
That's the core of it. He sought a single natural principle underlying all of reality, laying the groundwork for, well, both philosophy and science as we'd later understand them.
And his big idea, the one everyone remembers, passed down by Aristotle.
It was water.
Water.
Yep. Water, or hydur in Greek, as the archê.
And archê means more than just water as the origin.
Much more. It's the origin, yes, but also the underlying substance and the ultimate guiding principle of all things. It sounds simple, everything is water, but philosophically it's incredibly profound and debated endlessly.
So why water? What led him there? Was it just looking around?
Aristotle thought so. He suggested it was based on observation. Think about it. All nourishment is moist.
Right. Things need water to live.
Heat seems to come from moisture. Seeds have moisture. Plus, crucially, water exists in different states. Solid ice, liquid water, gas vapor.
So it looked versatile, like it could transform into other things.
Exactly. It made it a plausible candidate for a fundamental shape-shifting substance. But, and this is where it gets really interesting, this idea also sounds strikingly similar to much older Near Eastern creation myths.
Oh, like what?
Like the Babylonian epic Enuma Elish. It starts with this primordial watery chaos, Apsu and Tiamat, watery beings.
So the big question is, was Thales just recycling old myths?
Or was he radically rationalizing them? That's the key scholarly debate. Aristotle certainly saw Thales as doing something new and exciting.
Why?
Because in Aristotle's view, Thales explained things without bringing in divine will, without anthropomorphic gods pulling the strings. He replaced the mythological narrative with a naturalistic hypothesis. That was the breakthrough.
But I've heard some modern scholars push back on that, suggesting maybe it wasn't so literal, that water as archê could be metaphorical.
Precisely. That's a major line of interpretation. Some propose water served as a powerful metaphor.
A metaphor for what?
For the fundamental unity of everything, the fluidity, the constant change, the flux that characterizes reality. In this view, Thales is maybe more like a philosopher poet.
Making a statement about the nature of the cosmos, not just its physical makeup.
Right. Less a claim that chairs are physically made of H2O, more a claim about interconnectedness and transformation. And there's even a more recent idea.
Yeah.
By a scholar named Nicholas Molinari. He argues Thales' thought might be deeply rooted in local religious context, specifically the cult of Apollonios in Miletus,
Acolovios.
a shape-shifting river and water deity. So, from this angle, choosing water wasn't some purely secular scientific move. It was more like abstracting an existing idea of a divine, life-giving power already associated with water in his own culture.
Which really complicates that clean break from myth narrative.
It absolutely does. It suggests the lines were much blurrier.
Okay, this leads us to another really weird, fascinating aspect of his thought. His universe wasn't dead matter, was it? He believed everything was alive.
That's right. It's called hylotheism, the idea that matter, hylo, is alive. For Thales, the water wasn't just passive stuff, it was dynamic, living, self-moving.
How do we know he thought that?
Well, there are two other famous fragments attributed to him by Aristotle that shed light on this. First, the idea that a magnet has a soul.
The soul. Psyche.
Yes, psyche, because it can move iron. Now, this shows a very early pre-Platonic idea of soul. It's not about consciousness or immortality here.
It's about motion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Psyche as the built-in principle of self-generated motion. And by saying a magnet has it, he's extending this life principle beyond humans and animals right into the mineral kingdom.
Okay, that's one. What's the other?
The even more enigmatic one, all things are full of gods.
Right. How on earth do we square that with the move towards logos, towards rational explanation? It sounds purely mystical.
Well, it's generated a huge range of interpretations. Some scholars see it as actually a step away from the old gods. They suggest gods here means something more like immanent, non-personal, natural forces or powers within things, not the anthropomorphic Olympian.
Okay, that's one view.
Another view connects it directly to the magnet. If even a stone can have this divine motive principle, psyche, then maybe this principle is everywhere, pervading the whole cosmos.
A generalization from the magnet.
Sort of, but there's a compelling alternative interpretation that, again, resists seeing this as demythologizing.
Which argues.
It argues that all things are full of gods is actually just a concise summary of the traditional Greek mythological worldview itself.
You mean where the sky is a god, the earth is a goddess.
Precisely, where major parts of the cosmos are divine beings. In this view, Thales isn't breaking from myth here at all. He's just stating a basic tenet of its sort of immanent pantheism.
Okay, so we have these seemingly contradictory ideas. Water is the ultimate principle. Magnets have souls. Everything's full of gods. How do they fit together? Or do they?
It's a great question, and I think the key is to avoid projecting our modern categories back onto Thales.
Our split between science and religion, you mean?
Exactly. That's largely a post-Enlightenment thing. The tension we feel between Thales the scientist and Thales the mystic is probably anachronistic. It wasn't a tension for him.
So how would he see it?
Look, if the universe's fundamental principle, the archê, water, is inherently alive, divine, and self-moving, then it's not just mere matter in our sense.
Which, that's active.
So to say water is the archê is already to say that the foundation of reality is a living divine power. All things are full of gods isn't some separate mystical claim added on top.
It's a consequence.
It's a direct consequence of his monistic believing in one fundamental principle and hylozoistic believing matter is alive, physics. He lived before these categories were split. He's proposing a single, unified, living, divine cosmos, and its principle happens to be water.
That makes a strange kind of sense. Okay, moving beyond the deep cosmic stuff, Thales also had this reputation in antiquity for practical skills, right? Geometry, astronomy.
He absolutely did. But, surprise, surprise, these are also subject to intense modern scrutiny.
Naturally. So geometry first. What was he credited with?
Ancient sources, mainly later ones like Proclus commenting on Eudemus, crate Thales with some pretty foundational geometric discoveries.
Like what?
Things like a circle is bisected by its diameter, the base angles of an isosceles triangle are equal, angles formed by intersecting straight lines are equal.
Basic stuff now, but maybe not then.
Exactly. Also, the angle-side-angle congruence criterion for triangles, and the famous Thales theorem,
Which is?
that an angle inscribed in a semicircle is always a right angle.
And he supposedly put this geometry to practical use. The stories about him measuring the Great Pyramid or figuring out how far away ships were, those are legendary.
They are, and these feats would definitely rely on geometric principles, probably involving similar triangles.
How did the pyramid story go?
There are a couple of versions. One, simpler one, is that he waited until the length of his own shadow was equal to his height and measured the pyramid's shadow at that moment.
Assuming the sun's rays are parallel.
Right. A more sophisticated version has him using similar triangles, comparing the ratio of his staff's height to its shadow with the ratio of the pyramid's height to its shadow.
And the ships at sea.
Again, likely using similar or congruent triangles, setting up measurements from the shore to calculate the distance.
So the big debate here is, did he just borrow practical tricks, or did he invent proof?
That's the crux of it. Did Thales introduce deductive proof, turning geometry into a theoretical science? Or was he just applying empirical rules of thumb maybe learned from the Egyptians or Babylonians?
What did the Egyptians have?
Egyptian surveyors were brilliant at solving practical problems, like reestablishing land boundaries after the Nile flood. But they seem to have used procedures, rules that worked, not generalized, abstract proofs.
And the consensus on Thales.
Most scholars today are pretty skeptical that he possessed the conceptual framework for formal axiomatic proof like Euclid later developed.
So crediting him with that is probably anachronistic, reading Euclid back into Thales.
That's the dominant view, yeah. His work was likely a crucial step towards generalization and abstraction, moving beyond just practical recipes, but probably short of rigorous formal demonstration as we understand it.
Okay, now for his most famous supposed scientific feat, predicting that solar eclipse.
Ah, yes, the eclipse of 585 BCE. Herodotus tells the story. About 150 years later, he claims Thales forewarned the Ionians of it, fixing for it the very year in which it actually took place.
And it supposedly stopped a battle.
Between the Lydians and the Medes, yeah. Darkness falls mid-battle, they freak out, make peace. Modern astronomers have even pinpointed the date. May 28, 585 BCE.
So the $64,000 question, did he actually predict it scientifically?
This is one of the most hotly contested claims about him, and the overwhelming scholarly consensus is almost certainly not.
Why not?
Well, a scientific prediction of that specific time, specific location would likely have been impossible for Thales, given the knowledge available then.
But didn't the Babylonians know about eclipse cycles?
They did. They knew about the Saros cycle, this roughly 18-year period where eclipses tend to repeat. They kept meticulous records.
Okay.
But even Babylonian records show they could only predict eclipse possibilities over broad regions. They couldn't pinpoint where an eclipse would be total.
Why not?
Because the Saros cycle isn't perfect, the path of totality shifts significantly, about 120 degrees of longitude with each cycle. To predict a local eclipse, you need a pretty sophisticated spherical model of the Earth, accurate longitude measurements, good astronomical data.
None of which Thales had.
Almost certainly not. He likely didn't even have the Saros cycle data directly, and definitely not the geometric model needed to use it for local prediction.
So the story is?
Best understood not as historical fact, but as a legend that grew up around this famous wise man. The prediction was probably, at best, a vague warning based on recognizing some pattern, maybe a lucky guess, or most likely a feat attributed to him after the fact to boost his reputation.
Makes sense. Retrofitting the evidence to fit the legend.
Happens all the time with figures like this.
So if his specific answers, like water being the archê or predicting eclipses, weren't necessarily correct or even historically accurate by our standards, where does his real legacy lie? You mentioned the tradition he started.
Exactly. It wasn't a formal school like Plato's Academy, but the Milesians, Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes represent this succession of thinkers engaged in a process of rational critique and improvement. That process set the course for Western philosophy.
A critical dialogue from the very beginning.
Absolutely. You see it so clearly in the lineage. Thales starts it off, posits water, something observable material, as the archê.
Okay, thesis, water.
Then his student, Anaximander, comes along and offers this powerful critique. He basically says, hang on, if one specific element like water was the infinite underlying principle, wouldn't its properties like wetness have completely overwhelmed and destroyed all the other opposing elements like fire ages ago?
Good point. If everything is water, how do you get fire?
Right. So Anaximander says the archê can't be any one specific element. It has to be something more abstract, something undefined, boundless, indeterminate.
The apeiron.
The apeiron. The unlimited or the indefinite. A primordial substance from which different elements separate out, maybe through some process of cosmic strife, without one dominating.
Okay. Antithesis. The apeiron. And then Anaximenes brings it full circle.
Kind of, yeah. Anaximenes, who followed Anaximander, seems to have found the apeiron a bit too abstract. Maybe unsatisfying.
Hard to grasp.
Exactly. So he returns to a specific observable substance, like Thales did, but he chooses air, or air.
Why air?
Maybe because it's less defined than water, more pervasive. But critically, he endows his air with the infinite, boundless quality of Anaximander's aperon, and his real innovation was providing a clear mechanism of change.
How did air change into other things?
Through condensation and rarefaction. He argued air becomes fire when it's rarefied, made thinner, and when it's condensed, made denser. It becomes wind, then cloud, then water, then earth, then even stone.
Like seeing steam condense to water, then freeze to ice.
Precisely. It provided a naturalistic explanation for how you get the diversity of the cosmos from one substance, something kind of missing from the others. So you get this amazing progression: concrete thesis, water, abstract antithesis, aperon, mechanistic synthesis, air-changing density.
And that whole back and forth shows that philosophy, right from the start, wasn't about just accepting dogma.
Not at all. It was a tradition of rational argument, critique, refinement, building on and arguing with your predecessors. That's the engine. And Thales's core ideas, seeking one unifying principle, committing to naturalistic explanations, they really laid the groundwork for almost all the pre-Socratics who followed.
How so?
Well, think of Pythagoras. He was mystical, sure, but he built on that Milesian mathematical interest. He just shifted the search for a material archê, like water or air, to a search for a formal one, number.
Seeing mathematical ratios is the key?
Right. Or Heraclitus with his famous doctrine, everything flows, pantarei. You can see that as developing the dynamic, transformative, living aspect of the Milesian archê, the universe as constant change, governed by logos.
And how did the later giants, Plato and Aristotle, see Thales? Did they recognize him as the starting point?
It's interesting. Plato actually mentions Thales only occasionally, usually as just one of the seven sages or, the butt of the joke in the well story.
He didn't make a big deal of him as the founder.
Not really. He used him more for literary effect. It's really Aristotle who canonizes Thales.
How did Aristotle do that?
Aristotle explicitly identifies him in his Metaphysics as the founder of this kind of philosophy, meaning natural philosophy, the first guy to systematically investigate material causes.
So Aristotle puts him on the map, philosophically speaking.
He does. But, as the scholar Harold Chernus famously argued, this canonization came at a price. Meaning Aristotle interpreted Thales and all the pre-Socratics through the lens of his own much more developed philosophical system, particularly his theory of four causes.
Material, formal, efficient, final causes.
Right. And he often criticizes the early thinkers like Thales for basically only grasping the material cause, the what stuff is it made of question.
So he's judging them by his own standards.
Exactly. It's what we call teleological historiography writing history, as if everything was leading up to your ideas. It cemented Thales' importance, for sure, but it also risks distorting what Thales himself was actually trying to do by measuring him against a standard he never aimed for.
Which means the Thales we talk about today isn't some pure historical figure we've directly accessed. He's a reconstruction.
A very careful reconstruction built from layers and layers of testimony. And understanding him means being critically aware of those sources themselves.
Okay, so let's talk about those sources. How much can we really trust them? Who are we actually hearing from when we hear about Thales?
It's crucial to remember we're dealing with a fragmented, often biased chain of transmission. Take Herodotus. He's writing maybe 150 years after Thales, which is relatively close.
That's good, right?
It's valuable, yeah. But Herodotus was, let's say, a great storyteller, not always a critical historian. He reported compelling tales like the eclipse prediction, so probably historical kernels in there, but likely embellished.
Okay, then Plato.
Writing later still. As we said, he uses Thales mostly as a literary archetype, the absent-minded professor, not really interested in historical biography.
And Aristotle.
Hugely important philosophically, our main source for Thales' core ideas like water as archê. But, as we discussed, highly interpretive, even polemical, he's using Thales to set up his own system.
Reading him through his own lens.
Definitely. Then you get much later sources. Proclus, writing in the 5th century CE, that's almost a millennium after Thales.
Well, what use is he?
He's invaluable because he preserves traditions about the geometric theorems, likely going back to Aristotle's student Eudemus. But the reliability hinges on Eudemus, who was closer, but still writing 2 centuries after Thales.
A long game of telephone.
Pretty much. And finally, you have Diogenes Laertius, probably 3rd century CE. His Lives of Eminent Philosophers is this treasure trove of information, anecdotes, book lists.
That's great.
It is, but it's also deeply problematic. He wrote maybe 8 centuries after Thales. He was completely uncritical, mixing reliable reports with total fabrication, gossip, jokes. It's more like a scrapbook than a critical history. You have to use him with extreme caution.
So it sounds like we're not just reading Thales, we're reading Herodotus, reading Thales, Aristotle interpreting Thales, Proclus reporting, Eudemus reporting Thales. It's layers upon layers.
Precisely.
What does all this mean for that traditional title he gets, Father of Western Philosophy? Has that come under fire in modern scholarship?
Oh, absolutely. That title and the narrative behind it has faced significant critique for a couple of main reasons.
Okay, like what?
First, the question of originality and influence. There's really strong evidence now that Thales and the other Milesians were significantly influenced by knowledge from neighboring cultures.
Egypt and Babylonia again.
Exactly. Particularly practical geometry and cosmology from Egypt, and definitely astronomy, like those eclipse records from Babylonia.
So he didn't just invent it all out of thin air.
No, the debate isn't really if there was influence, but what kind of influence it was. The dominant view now isn't that he just copied things.
But that he transformed them.
Right. His genius, perhaps, lay in the rational transformation of this received knowledge. Taking empirical rules from Egypt, mythic or observational records from Babylonia, and repurposing them within a new framework, one seeking naturalistic universal principles, the logos, where the Egyptians saw practical techniques and the Babylonians saw divine portents.
So it's about the reimagining and the shift in purpose.
Exactly. But that reliance on prior knowledge challenges the idea of him being an absolute first and second. It's challenged by looking at how the ancient Greeks themselves saw the origins of wisdom.
They didn't all think philosophy started with Thales.
Not necessarily as an absolute beginning out of nowhere. Many ancient writers, including Herodotus and Plato, actually traced wisdom back to non-Greek peoples, especially the Egyptians.
So the idea of a purely Greek miracle is maybe more modern.
It's certainly been questioned. That narrative gets solidified later, and this whole critique has been amplified recently by non-Eurocentric philosophical perspectives.
How so?
While fields like sage philosophy in Africa, for example, highlight how thinkers in traditional, often oral cultures engaged in critical, rational inquiry doing philosophy, but were denied the title philosopher because of historical colonial biases, often linked to an overemphasis on written traditions.
Which implicitly defined philosophy in a way that makes Thales the convenient starting point for a Western tradition.
Precisely. It forces us to question the definition of philosophy itself and why we cordon off Thales as the sole origin point.
So, the study of Thales isn't static. It keeps evolving as our own perspectives change.
That's a perfect way to put it. Studying Thales is inseparable from the historiography of pre-Socratic philosophy generally, and that field has seen this remarkable increase in scholarly work in recent decades.
New texts, new approaches.
Both. New fragments sometimes surface, but mostly it's new ways of reading the old evidence, challenging the older interpretive models. Even the label pre-Socratic is now seen by many as problematic, kind of lumping together very different thinkers just because they came before Socrates.
Right, it defines them by who they weren't.
Exactly. And this whole reevaluation reveals what we could call a historiographical feedback loop.
Meaning
Meaning the study of Thales isn't just uncovering a fixed historical guy. It's a dynamic process where the questions we ask, the categories we use, philosopher, scientist, pre-Socratic, actively shape the Thales we end up discovering.
So we partly create the Thales we study.
In a sense, yes. Aristotle, wanting to legitimize his own project, frames Thales as the first natural philosopher, creating that canonical role. Later, European historians in the 18th and 19th centuries cemented his status as the father of Western philosophy. Today, critical scholarship pushes back. The Thales we study is an intellectual artifact, constructed and reconstructed over 2,500 years. So when you pull it all together, Thales of Miletus emerges not as this simple starting point, but as a figure of really profound complexity and transition.
Caught between worlds, almost.
Very much so. A man deeply embedded in the practical wisdom traditions, the mythological worldviews of his time and place. Yet, simultaneously, he's standing right at the threshold of a completely new intellectual era.
But the evidence doesn't really paint him as a fully formed scientist or philosopher in our modern sense.
No, not really. It points more towards a pivotal innovator. Someone who initiated a revolutionary shift, not necessarily in the answers he gave, but in the method of inquiry itself.
And that's where his enduring significance lies, not in whether the Earth floats on water.
Which, spoiler alert, it doesn't.
Huh, right. But in the sheer novelty of the questions he asked and the approach he took. By seeking that single, natural, universal principle for everything.
He made this radical implicit claim. He claimed that the universe isn't just some chaotic stage for divine soap operas.
But an ordered, intelligible whole.
An ordered, intelligible whole, a cosmos whose fundamental principles are actually accessible to human reason, to logos.
That shift from mythos to logos.
That move, however incomplete it was in Thales himself, however blurred the lines were, it marks the foundational moment of the Western intellectual tradition. You see it immediately picked up, debated, advanced by his successors in Miletus and Anaximander and Anaximenes.
The critical dialogue we talked about.
Exactly, and it just echoes down through the entire history of philosophy after that.
So Thales isn't the final answer to philosophy's big questions. He's more like the embodiment of the first great question.
That's a brilliant way to put it. He embodies that enduring inquiry into the ultimate nature of reality that really still defines what philosophy is all about.
So a thought for you, our listeners, to take away. When you next encounter an idea that really challenges your fundamental assumptions, something that maybe feels like it's presenting a whole new way of looking at the world.
Think of Thales.
Yeah, think of Thales. Ask yourself, what are the underlying principles here? And maybe reflect on how much our own understanding right now is shaped by the kinds of questions we even dare to ask in the first place.